through Southwestern College's professional studies. Also, thank you for attending both here in this room and online for today's panel discussion. I'm Andy Shepard. I'm the provost at Southwestern College. I'm delighted to serve as your moderator for today's event, and our format will be fairly straightforward. In a moment, I'll introduce Officer Santiago, who will set the table with some broad remarks about policing intelligence, and then we're going to kind of do a round robin, about 10 minutes of each of our panelists, and then open it up for a Q&A. So let me begin by giving you a little bit of background about our panelists today. Southwestern College's professional studies. Lionel Santiago joined Southwestern College in 2012. Thank you for attending both here in this room and online. Security management program. He served for today's Police panel discussion since 1999. I'm Andy Shepard. I'm the provost at Southwestern College. I'm delighted to serve as your moderator for today's event. And our format will be fairly straightforward. In a moment, I'll introduce Officer Santiago, who will set the table with some broad remarks about policing intelligence, and then we're going to kind of do a round robin, about 10 minutes of each of our panelists, and then open it up for a Q&A. Sedgwick County Sheriff Jeff Easter. So let me begin by giving you a little bit of background about our panelists. Southwestern College's professional studies. Santiago joined Southwestern College. Thank you for attending both here in this room and online. Who was shot in he served for today's panel discussion. 1999. I'm Andy Shepard. I'm the provost of Southwestern College. I'm delighted to serve as your moderator. Retired Wichita Police Chief Norman Williams began his 39-year law enforcement career as a Wichita patrol officer in 1975. In 2000, he was appointed as Chief of Police for the state's largest police department. Notably under his administration was the capture of serial killer Dennis Rader, known as BTK, who eluded authorities and terrified the city for more than 30 years. Williams also played a lead role in a 2007 multi-agency task force that put numerous gang members behind bars. Major General Michael Lehnert is perhaps most notable for his role at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Originally placed in charge of 13 refugee camps in 2002, he oversaw its transformation into a detention facility for suspected members of Al-Qaeda and Taliban. Disagreeing with tactics used there, he publicly expressed his opinion that the facility needs to be shut down. The general left Guantanamo Bay in 2003, deployed to the CENTCOM theater and took part in Operation Iraqi Freedom, where he served as commander for the Marine Logistics Command. He returned to the United States in 2005 and assumed command of the Marine Corps Installations West. His many decorations include Defense Superior Service Medal with 1 Oak Leaf Cluster, Legion of Merit Award with Gold Star, and Defense Meritorious Service Medal with 2 Oak Leaf Clusters. General Lehnart's participation here today is made possible through the Woodrow Wilson Visiting Scholars Program. Again, thank you all for coming. Gentlemen, your mics are hot, so no cussing.
Thank you, Dr. Shepard. Before I begin, I want to quickly recognize you and thank you for your leadership, as well as my friend Arthur Smith, who has been so hospitable this week. General Lehnert, Sheriff Easter, Chief Williams, Dr. Shepard, Dr. Esau, colleagues and friends, it is indeed a pleasure to be here today and to be part of this distinguished panel commemorating Southwestern College Professional Studies' 20th anniversary. We want to dedicate as much time to engaging in a collaborative discussion with you, so I'll keep my comments brief. However, I will lay out some of the broad concepts of intelligence-led policing and briefly address 2 issues of great importance to me, the issue of privacy and ethics. As I was thinking about the topic of this discussion, my thoughts kept drifting back to that fateful day of September 11th, 2001. It was a Tuesday. I had just finished my morning workout before coming on duty when a friend rushed into the men's locker room and yelled that a plane had just crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. I rushed towards the nearest TV. There were already about 15 or so other officers there, gathered in a semicircle around the television set. We were listening intently with an occasional comment or two, speculating as to what was occurring right before our eyes. Shortly thereafter, the second plane hit the South Tower. After a few references to God and a few choice words shouted at the TV, a stunned silence filled the gym. It was almost like we all instantly knew our world had changed. Our squad was then ordered to City Hall to facilitate its evacuation, and then took positions around its perimeter. In the blink of an eye, a paradigm shift occurred in the criminal justice and security disciplines and in our national priorities. A national debate ensued as we began to analyze the lessons learned, and we began to navigate the rough waters of the asymmetric security environment of the 21st century. We have analyzed and debated many issues at all levels of government and the private sector, from the constitutionality of such to the role of federalism to intelligence sharing, among many others. Significant progress has been made, but this debate continues today and will for the foreseeable future, and I would submit to you that this is a good thing. This brings me to the topic of the role of intelligence in policing, or intelligence-led policing, ILP. But before we discuss some of the principles of ILP, I think it's important to understand how the principles of community-oriented policing tie into this fairly new framework of intelligence in our discipline. It can be argued that you cannot have an effective intelligence-led policing philosophy without having a strong community-oriented policing philosophy. They do not and should not compete with each other. Intelligence-led policing builds on the principles of community-oriented policing. They are in essence synonymous with each other. Therefore, the investments made in building and fostering community relationships must not be ignored. In fact, we need to intensify our efforts in the community we serve and continue to build and foster these relationships in order for this new intelligence-led focus to be successful. From officer-led mentoring programs to strong neighborhood watch programs to developing and maintaining relationships with neighborhood homeowners associations, sponsoring Christmas toy drives at neighborhood centers, and developing partnerships with faith-based institutions and non-governmental associations. All are examples of community engagement, and all of which contribute to the cultivation of an environment of communication, trust, and understanding between the community and law enforcement. Now, this is good business, but isn't this the essence of public and community service? Fast forward to the focus on intelligence in law enforcement circles after the events of September 11th. The post-9/11 mindset and challenges of global terrorism demanded a more strategic philosophy towards crime fighting. An environment where information sharing and proactivity were a driving force in the decision-making process. Much like our brothers and sisters at the federal level, local and state law enforcement needed to do a better job of communicating within their own organization, but also with other local, state, and federal agencies. At the Orlando Police Department, we are continuing to focus on community-oriented policing as we implement intelligence-led policing principles. In his inaugural speech this past April, Orlando Police Chief John W. Mina outlined several departmental priorities, one of which was to, quote, utilize intelligence-led policing, crime analysis, and technology in an effort to prevent and reduce crime and apprehend those responsible, end of quote. The International Association of Chiefs of Police defines intelligence-led policing as, quote, a policing model based on a collaborative approach, focus on the word collaborative here, approach that incorporates many factors including intelligence operations, community-oriented policing, information management, scientific data analysis, and problem solving. Why institute intelligence-led policing principles? Well, in an era of economic uncertainty and diminishing resources, ILP can help an agency better understand the environment it is operating in. This lends to a targeted effort and a more efficient use of law enforcement resources. In addition, ILP assists an agency in making strategic planning decisions. The analysis of the information will produce an intelligence product which will provide a broad picture of the current and emerging criminal environment. ILP offers a path for greatly enhancing the investigative and situational awareness process as units share information in almost real time, from one sector, zone, or district to another, from midnight shift to day shift, from patrol units to community-oriented policing units or drug enforcement units. Information gathered, shared, and analyzed should travel horizontally and vertically across all levels in a continuous manner. ILP is of great importance to the individual officer as well, as he or she is made aware of crime patterns, suspicious activity, and officer safety issues. Furthermore, intelligence-led policing may answer questions such as where are some of the crime hotspots and problem locations? Who are the most likely offenders? What crimes are related? What persons are connected to specific crime scenes? And what changes are happening in a specific neighborhood or area. We are now paying more close attention to some of these issues and being more proactive. As illustrated, this intelligence gives the command staff great flexibility to address a myriad of issues at the planning, tactical, and strategic levels. Now, I believe that everybody in this room understands that in order to have good intelligence, you must have valid information. One can have an efficient and sophisticated information gathering capability, but unless that information is analyzed appropriately, it is just that. It's just raw information. I like to use the analogy of predicting the behavior of a hurricane. Meteorologists have some facts in hand due to the data that is provided by satellite imagery. However, in order to know more about its direction, strength, and other measurements, they need to send out an aircraft over the hurricane to gather more information. That information is collected and analyzed, and a clearer picture emerges. This information is then dispersed across news outlets, government agencies, and so forth. And it's from this intelligence that very important decisions are made. Therefore, the analytical capability of the agency to evaluate, analyze, and produce an intelligence product is of paramount importance. In addition, investments in software and technology also complement the analytical effort and enhance its effectiveness. Former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, once said that all politics is local. There's much truth to that statement. The same can be said about the role of law enforcement in the sense that all crime or terror incident is local. It may originate in a foreign land, but it occurs at the local level. Our ability to collect, generate, and analyze local information plays a critical part in the piece of the puzzle that can assist in the prevention of a national terror incident. I also believe that in order to have an honest discussion about ILP or intelligence operations for that matter, we need to recognize that there may be some that have some inherent apprehension to such activities, especially when it comes to the issue of privacy. In the last few years, the issue of privacy and the invasion of such by government and private entities have reached a feverish pitch. Recent NSA revelations certainly added fuel to the fire and further feed the environment of apprehension among the public. Therefore, we must educate the public, inform them of our priorities and successes. We must leverage the power of social media to communicate and highlight policing efforts. We must also hold each other accountable and have in place strong policies and procedures providing the guidelines and parameters of intelligence activities. Just like law enforcement agencies across the nation have procedures for search and seizure, use of force, vehicle pursuits, property and evidence, and so on, we should also have procedures in place that govern intelligence activities of all law enforcement personnel. As a discipline, we must develop and encourage ethics training in our continuing education programs at law enforcement trainings across our nation. Academic programs in our educational institutions must also make a commitment to ethics. Southwestern College, I am proud to say, recognizes this logic and has ingrained ethical reasoning as one of its institutional outcomes. Academia must do its part in educating the future leaders of our discipline. Now, there are many reasons why we should continue to focus on ethics within our discipline, but let me provide you with just one. We should focus on ethics simply because it's just the right thing to do. In the age of increasing relativity, we need to remain focused and profess the absolutes of our profession. Former D.C. Metropolitan Police Chief and current Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey captured the spirit of this discussion when he states the following, and I quote, "The oath to serve and protect means much more than protecting life and property. Our oath also carries with it the unique and awesome responsibility of protecting the constitutional rights of all Americans, of safeguarding the very freedoms that we cherish and that sets us apart from so many other nations on earth. Today, the threat of terrorism creates challenges to our physical safety and security as well as to our traditions of fairness, equality, and liberty. Faced with such threats, we will increasingly be forced to weigh issues of individual privacy against the issues of public security. We will be tempted to use new and powerful surveillance technologies just because we can, but should we? Moving forward, we will have to be more thoughtful about which technologies to deploy. Technology is sometimes a benefit and sometimes a curse. Of course, we should pursue effective and appropriate technological solutions to our problems, but we must also consciously decide where the limits lie and do so before we cross those lines. As police weigh conflicting obligations, we need to remind ourselves constantly that our first priority is the protection of our constitutional rights," end quotes. I believe Commissioner Ramsey's statement serves as a reminder of our sovereign responsibility as we venture forward into uncharted waters of the 21st century security environment. Intelligence-led policing principles work. There is much promise in further exploring their potential. We should continue to leverage new technologies in order to better protect our communities and our nation. Now more than ever, we need to be proactive, relentless in our pursuit of those who do us harm. However, we must never forget our solemn oath. We are the thin blue line. In this asymmetric and dynamic environment, the end sometimes does not justify the means. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Lionel. My name is Mike Lehnert, and I've been asked to address the national security and the law enforcement issues. The events of 11 September 2001 changed our country and the way that American citizens live today. The unprovoked attack on the icons of American power and the deaths of nearly 3,000 innocent victims is firmly etched in the minds of every adult citizen. I'm going to offer, however, a bit of a contrarian view than one normally offered by administration officials of either party. Because as tragic as the events of that day were, we also need to ask ourselves as Americans if we are not playing into the terrorists' hands by our actions. The objective of terrorism or terrorists is to change what we believe and what we think is important. Terrorist acts are by design planned and executed to elicit a response and to gain popular support for a cause. The day after 9/11, we had the support of the world. In the 13 years after that sad event, the support eroded, and it eroded rapidly. How did that happen? Before I answer that question, I want to address the danger we face today. Since 9/11, law enforcement, national military intelligence, our military, and other government agencies have become significantly better at sharing vital information and preventing domestic acts of terrorism. How good are they? Well, according to a recent Washington Post report and confirmed by a study in The Economist, your chances of dying in a terrorist attack in the next year are 1 in 20 million. Or said another way, in accounting for a life expectancy of 80 years, for the individuals in this room and online, your chances of dying of a terrorist attack in the U.S. are about 1 in 250,000 in any given, in your lifetime. To put this in perspective, your chances of dying by assault by firearm wielded by an American are 1 in 340. Now, I'm not trying to say that terrorism isn't a threat. It is. I am saying, however, that our law enforcement professionals and our government agencies have done a good job ensuring that terrorism occurs largely away from our shores. So what is the cost of achieving the level of security that we enjoy today? First was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the growth of agencies within that organization, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that because the rule in public speaking is to talk about what you know. It's one that I always try to follow. So after I retired from the Marine Corps, I was immediately asked to serve as the senior advisor to the Commissioner for Customs and Border Protection. So I'm going to give you some data points. In 1992, the U.S. Border Patrol strength was 4,139. By April of 2011, that number had grown to 20,745 Border Patrol agents, and during this administration, an increase of 18%. This does not include the over 20,000 personnel in the Office of Field Operations, which most of you and I would all know as Customs. They are responsible for the security at legal ports of entry, including all international airports, seaports, and legal border crossings. The burden cost of paying, training, and equipping each agent is about $174,000. So I'll do the math for you per year. That what we're paying for just in the uniform folks in Customs and Border Protection is about $7 billion. So when you hear the politicians talk about securing the border and balancing the budget in the same breath, check their math. There's no such thing as a free lunch. But the American people have decided that this is something that's important to them. In general, these agents do a very good job moving about 965,000 legal passengers and pedestrians through legal border crossings each day of the year. So that's nearly 1 million people every single day, as well as 47,000 truck and rail sea containers and about 258,000 incoming privately owned vehicles. Now, each of those daily events is a vulnerability and requires an individual decision on the part of a uniformed member of that organization to decide whether or not to allow them to come in. At the same time, the American people expect that decision to be as non-invasive as possible. And so therein you have that dynamic friction. About 1,900 apprehensions are made at these legal border crossings every single day and result in about 75 arrests at these points of entry every single day. At the same time, trade has to be facilitated. Before I came there and I was just working as a Marine, I didn't realize just how much stuff moved back and forth through these ports of entry. The annual value of trade moving through our ports of entry is about $2 trillion a year. That's trillion with a T. That's a number bigger than I can even fathom. Additionally, there's an added value of about $94 billion in international tourism. So the objective here is to keep the bad stuff out and let the good stuff in. There are other costs associated with our demand for maximum possible security within our nation, and that is the loss that Lionel already alluded to of individual privacy and rights. The amount of data kept on each individual citizen, not just by the government, but by private entities as well, is mind-boggling. For some, this is an issue of little concern. For others, it's a cause for alarm. For those who have confidence that both the private and the public sector will use this data only for legitimate and necessary purposes, the response is humimwe. For those who have less trust in the motives of either our leaders or the private sector, there are calls to curb the continuous collection of personal information. So as we get into this dialogue today, we have to ask ourselves some questions. Are we willing to pay for our zero tolerance for terrorism on our soil? Can we afford the price tag, both in terms of dollars and the loss of civil liberties? Said another way, is there an acceptable level of risk? What obstacles still exist that limit information sharing, particularly between intelligence organizations and law enforcement? Should all of those obstacles be removed, or were some put in place for good reasons? Is there an opportunity for a nuanced dialogue about the relationship between civil liberties and security? Are there opportunities out there for better coordination between the analysts who work at the national level and local authorities that might help anticipate threats likely to affect homeland security? Is the terrorism nomenclature developed over the past decade appropriate for future threats? Do the ways that we categorize terrorist organizations limit our vision and cause us to overestimate some organizations and underestimate others? And as I was doing the research for this talk today, for example, I'll give you a couple of examples. The two most active domestic terrorist organizations in the United States since 2001 are the Earth Liberation Front and the Animal Liberation Front. They've been responsible for 84 attacks, but they've killed no one. They mostly set fire to facilities. On the other hand, Al-Qaeda has only had 4 attacks on U.S. soil, all on 9/11, but they killed 2,996 people. Yet in much analysis of terrorist activity, each attack is given equal weight. We need to have a more nuanced way to think about these issues. And we also need to create new ways to categorize the threat that improves our ability to detect intersections among cyber criminals, organized crime, narco-traffickers, and terrorists. We need more alternative analysis and more frequent interaction between the strategic analysts in Washington and local authorities, and that might help in anticipating the kind of threats that are likely to affect homeland security. I'd also offer that Washington's tendency to focus on fault finding rather than improving performance is counterproductive. A more results-oriented dialogue is necessary. We need better investigative cooperation with state and local entities, and we think that that could be achieved by determining why the relationship between the Joint Terrorism Task Forces and local police forces are limited, and remove those obstacles that reasonable people can agree are unnecessary obstacles that prevent consistent and quality cooperation between them. Privacy and civil liberties protections must be at the forefront in rethinking relationships and breaking down barriers between the intelligence community and law enforcement agencies. We need to strike a balance between security and liberty. We also need to put in place smart security measures that don't put a stranglehold on trade. Security at the price of economic competitiveness is not an option unless we are willing to accept a much lower standard of living in this country. Finally, I'm going to circle back to the objective of terrorists. They want to change our behavior, to make us live in fear. When we change behavior to the point that it significantly circumscribes our personal liberties, they have won. Thank you.
I'd like to say good morning to each and every one of you, and also want to say to Dr. Andy Shepard, thank you for the invitation, as well as Southwest College, to be here to participate in this dynamic discussion on intelligence-led policing. I think Officer Santiago must have been looking over my shoulder when I developed my remarks, because you may hear some of the same information, because I'm bringing it from the standpoint of several things I'm going to do. We're going to define what intelligence-led policing is, and also bring it from a local perspective as far as the Wichita Police Department. And then the other thing that's important is to talk about the essence of community engagement. As I said, Officer Santiago talked a little bit about that, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about when I say community engagement. I'd like to, instead of going back to 2011 as far as 2001 as far as the terrorist attack on our country, I want to go back to the 1960s to talk a little bit about law enforcement. If you go back to the 60s, that was a very turbulent time in our nation. From the standpoint, we had so many different riots going on. You had riots in Chicago, Detroit, Watts, and as a result of those riots at that time, several different significant commissions were created. You had the Warren Commission, who was, at that time was Supreme Court's Judge Earl Warren, headed up a commission that originally was looking at the assassination of former President John Kennedy, but has expanded to look at human rights, civil rights, because of the unrest that was going on. We also had the commission that was created by the President's Commission on Law Enforcement Administration Justice. And the reason I bring that up is because law enforcement has gone through evolutions since its establishment back in the days of the 1800s. Another critical time was the 1970s, as we moved towards, at that time, what we call team policing. And the essence of team policing, and former Chief Richard Lemunyon here in 1976 as the police chief implemented team policing within the Wichita Police Department. And what that did was try to decentralize the operations to be closer to the citizens that we serve. Go back to that unrest. There was a lot of disconnect between the police and citizens. And so that was important as we move forward. Let's fast forward now to the 1990s, community policing. Community policing, and we heard a little about that. Community policing is about building relationships, building partnerships, engaging the community in problem solving, identifying those issues that impact their quality of life in their neighborhoods. And that was one of the things that was important for us as far as the Wichita Police Department, was to adopt the community policing philosophy, because that was important. As we move to the latter part of the 90s, we now hear a lot of information in regards to intelligence-led policing, and the fact that that was important, as it was integrated in both community policing as well as problem-oriented policing. Ironically, when you look at the definition, Officer Santiago gave a definition as well. This is the definition that I've utilized for quite some time as far as the collection and analysis of information to produce an intelligence end product designed to inform police decision-makings at both the tactical and the strategic levels. When we say strategic levels, we're talking about an overview as far as criminal activities, threats to the communities, and how you as a decision maker are able to analyze information to help you to develop a proactive response to that threat to that community. That is an overview, a high-level approach. The technical aspect is focusing on those immediate needs, looking at investigations, looking at issues that impact an officer's safety. That, to me, is the tactical aspect when it comes to looking at intelligence-led policing. The key here is when you look at this information as far as intelligence-led policing, integrated enhancement that can attribute to public safety. Integrated enhancements. In other words, helping to make a community safe, including the tenets of community policing. To me, that's what intelligence-led policing is entailed from that standpoint. In 2000, the British National Intelligence Criminal Services developed what they call a national intelligence model. And as I looked at their model, I see a lot of semblance in what we did or do within the Wichita Police Department. One of the first things it talked about was targeting prolific suspects or offenders. And that's one of the things that we've tried to do from the standpoint of making our community safe. Instead of having a shotgun approach, there's individuals that we identify, that we focus on, organizations that we focus on, that we directed our resources in which to bring them to justice. To give you an example, in 2004, when we created our comprehensive gang plan, we identified certain individuals that we focus on. We identified certain groups, whether it's the Crips, the Bloods. And when you look at gangs also tie into intelligence-led policing, because we had to understand how they do business in order for us to be able to coordinate our resources. Of course, in 2006, at that time, Sheriff Easter headed up a multi-task force that focused on these neighborhood Crips. And as a result, the Racketeer Influence Corruption Organization federal statute was used to take about 78 gang members off the streets here in the city of Wichita. Looking at that model, targeted approach. The other thing that was important is managing crime and also disorder hotspots. That crime analysis, identifying where your hotspots, whether it's burglaries, robberies, whether it's rapes, aggravated assaults, identifying those issues, analyzing what's going on, and being able to direct resources, because that is important. In this day and age of dwindling resources, you have to be judicious and you have to be efficient in how you designate and delegate resources to bear on those areas of crimes that generate a hotspot. The other thing was to identify and looking at investigative techniques. That was important for us at that time. Preventive measures. Ironically, in 2002, there was a project that we called the Plainview Project, which allowed us to do a survey to find out why was crime so high in Plainview? What was driving those forces? At that time, Sheriff Easter was the community policing supervisor. As a result, we identified that as a result of a survey, 5 of the 10 responses dealt with juvenile issues, vandalism, crime, truancy, you name it. And so what did we do? We developed, in collaboration with the community and Park Board, a strategic approach to keep kids busy during the summer months, during the time between June through August. And as a result of that, we were able to win our second Weber Seavey Award, which is a international award that recognizes excellence in law enforcement. There again, we took information. From that information, we developed a plan of action, and we included partners to help us as far as getting things accomplished as we went forward. And like I said, this is the model that we try to utilize as the police department. In 2010, we created what we call an intelligence hub. Because there again, you heard a lot about the importance of confidentiality and civil rights, we created an intelligence hub where we could put confidential information on that hub that was accessible to the commission members of the Wichita Police Department, whether it was police officers, detectives, command staff, supervisors. That was important. What kind of information did we put up there? Well, the other thing that was important is that we got additional email accounts. That was important, getting email accounts so that information could be accessible and to be disseminated among the members. We look at crime trends and try to get that information out. The other thing that was important was looking at suspects. Suspects, whether it's criminal suspects or whether it's gang members. Anytime we had a gang-related incident, crime in our community, that information, potential suspects, was posted on that intelligence hub and was made available to any officer that is out there patrolling the streets. Because even though there's been a tremendous emphasis on terrorism, we still have to maintain the safety and well-being of the citizens in this community. We still have to deal with those day-to-day operations as far as crimes that impact people's lives and threaten their well-being. And so that was very important for us from that standpoint. One of the things we've also done is in 2011, we added crime analysts to each one of our 4 substations. And you're probably saying, what was the significance of having those crime analysts? Instead of waiting 3 weeks, a month to get information to determine if you have a trend going on, they are responsible to look at what's happening each and every day to see if there's a trend. If they identify a trend, they share that information with their supervisors. The supervisors then develop a plan of action. They pull together resources, they contact investigations, they make sure they utilize the resources needed to make that neighborhood safe. And that was important for us. We also added another crime analyst to the 4th floor of City Hall. That crime analyst was responsible to the investigative section, looking at trends, sharing information. The other thing that we've heard a little bit about is talking about as far as terrorism. We too have focused on trying to make sure that we educate our officers on the basics, understanding how to interview people, to get information, whether it's a victim, suspect, witness, because information is critical in our world. And if you're not asking those journalistic questions, who, what, when, how, and where, it's difficult for us to be able to determine if we have a crime situation brewing or if we have somebody that is planning to commit a terrorist act. You look across the country over the last couple of years, several different major potential incidents have been thwarted because citizens have shared information with their local authorities. The other thing is there again, talking about terrorism and also looking at the 8 different signs. This is a training that we provided our personnel back in 2013 because, like I said, we still have a responsibility to deal with the day-to-day operations of making our community safe, but we also have to look at the national perspective dealing with issues of terrorism. The other thing is community engagement, and I call your attention to that one word, trust. Community engagement is critical when it comes to intelligence-led policing. Who better knows what goes on in the neighborhood than the citizens that live there? And so the more things that we can do to build and enhance trust, it creates a win-win for each and every one of us. The other part of that is it allows citizens to feel like they have a vested interest when it comes to their neighborhood, because everybody wants a safe neighborhood. And if you want a safe neighborhood, you're going to work with the authorities to share information. As I mentioned to you before, the number of preventive things that have happened because of that relationship between citizens and their local law enforcement agencies. It's important to encourage citizens to participate in making and sharing information. But not only sharing information, but we have to be willing to explain to them the process as far as how information flows and to be able to provide them with feedback. One of the things that I find that's so disheartening, whether it's as a police officer, as a citizen, is I may give you information, but I don't get anything back. That is one of the things that we saw early on the national level when it came to intelligence-led sharing information to deal with terrorism. Local law enforcement would give information to the federal government, but we never heard anything back. And I think over the years, that has improved tremendously, where there is now two-way communications, because most terrorist planning are going to start at the local level because and expand to the national level. This slide here is one of the things that I really focus on, and a lot of the department members that are here understand this slide here. When you start talking about intelligence-led policing, it's about all of these partners. All of these partners are critical when it comes to gathering information, analyzing information, sharing information to prevent any type of incident, whether it be a criminal act or whether it be a terrorist act, from occurring within a community. Lastly, I'd like to just close out with, as far as summarizing what I call the 4 Ps. I mean, that captures what I'm talking about. Intelligence-led policing centers around partnerships, whether it's partnerships between local, state, federal government, citizens, you name it, the military, any and everyone that has some kind of information that can prevent a terrorist or criminal act is important to what we do. The other thing is being proactive, being able to gather and assess information and to develop a plan of action. Go back to that Britain model where we talked about analyzing and then developing a plan to be able to respond to it. Lastly is prevention. Prevention is the ultimate strategy that will allow us to break the cycle of crime and to prevent any kind of action from occurring within our community. And then lastly, problem solving. I mean, problem solving is the heart and soul of intelligence-led policing, community policing, you name it. Problem solving is so important, because if you don't gather the intelligence, analyze it, develop a plan of action, include your stakeholders, you're not going to address the root causes, and thereby that problem is going to consist. So I realize that was a quick overview. I'll definitely be here for questions, and once again, I just want to say thank you.
Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to allow me to speak today. I'm going to kind of go through a series of things that's gone on throughout my career with the Wichita Police Department, and then advance it to what we're doing within the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office at this point. Law enforcement learns from their mistakes. And through this time frame, we made mistakes. There was a time when we were beat officers, and there's a couple people over here that will remember this, when we responded to drive-by shootings back in the early 90s. There was 2 officers that responded. One to talk to the victim if they weren't injured, and the other to drive around to see if they could find anything. Once you worked the scene, you left. Usually you worked another drive-by shooting that night, if not 3 or 4 more that night, because that's how we responded. And that was not a very good way to respond. We did not have good relationships with the communities. We didn't have anybody telling us what was occurring. I couldn't blame the folks for telling us that, because we couldn't protect them. If they told us something and we reacted to it, their house was the next one to get shot up. And so we had to learn as a law enforcement agency how to adapt to those type of situations. Thus, in 1994, community policing came aboard. Within the Wichita Police Department, when community policing was brought aboard, and I was inside the city building at the time that occurred, I came back out as a sergeant. I saw the transformation in the communities. People were waving at you, and not with one finger. And so they were talking with you. They were telling you what was going on. That's when I realized this is the way to do policing. The chief mentioned on several occasions different projects that were done. It was very important to survey citizens to find out what was going on in their community. Now, we in law enforcement thought we knew what was going on. The chief mentioned the Plainview project. We had a couple homicides down there, some shootings, some drive-bys. So we thought it was gang-related and dealing with violent crime. It turns out their #1 complaints were driving issues and juvenile complaints. And any survey that we've done ever since then, what do you think is the #1 issue people bring up? Speeding in their neighborhoods. And you can have all types of burglaries and stuff. That's usually the #1 issue they bring up. We have to address that. But we also have to realize, we also know that there's other problems there. We got to the underlying reason for those issues. It was juveniles that didn't have anything else better to do, and the gang members were in there infiltrating those juveniles and getting them to do some of their dirty work. So we addressed those issues. Fast forward to the mid-1990s, another mistake that we made when we had some gang issues that were going on in certain parts of Wichita, we flooded those areas with police officers. Who do you think got most of the tickets and most of the attention? The citizens that live there, because the gang members saw all of us out there, they went under. You couldn't find a gang member anywhere. But who was getting all the tickets? That made some folks not very happy with us. So we had to learn from that. Chief mentioned the gang plan. When that was implemented, actually prior to implementation, there was numerous meetings that took place with different entities, including youth groups, because we wanted to get their perspective. That's the first time that I'm aware of with the Wichita Police Department. We actually went into high schools to get their perspectives of what was going on and to get their perspective of what the police should do to handle this situation. A comprehensive gang plan was brought forward with citizen involvement, plus the citizens rolled out the gang plan as well. So it was not just a police issue. What we learned from that is to direct our resources and our attention to those individuals that were committing the crimes in our city. We fast forward again to 2009. With all these lessons that we learned, community policing was working very well in the city of Wichita. We had a lot of good relationships, knew all the main players in each community so that we could go to them with any issues that were occurring. In 2009, at Patrol North, we started looking at the fact that we had a lot of technology at our hands. Technology had come a long ways. How do we better utilize that technology? Approached the chief in reference to intelligence-led policing. It was something that we had read about, really didn't know a whole lot about. Few departments were utilizing it at the time, and started doing our research. From that point, we started utilizing the technology as well. And technology is a key piece to intelligence-led policing. In my opinion, you cannot do intelligence-led policing unless you have the technology in place. Not to bore you with all that is, but getting onto a computer from a beat officer level inside of their vehicle and being able to pull up what crimes occurred on their beat overnight, pull up maybe who some suspect information is on that, and then integrate that with other type of avenues that we have in reference to who's out on parole. That's a very big one when you're talking about burglars. Burglars almost always repeat their crime. And when you look at, okay, who got paroled in this particular neighborhood that's been out a month and we've experienced 15 burglaries in the last 2 weeks, who are you going to look at first? People that's done that crime before. You start looking at the MOs on it. Is it the same MO that they had prior to going to prison? Yes, it is. Is it the same type of things being taken? Yes, it is. We also have a pawn shop database. You start looking in that pawn shop database to see if items from that particular burglary have been pawned. Who pawned them? They're smart enough not to use their name, but who do they use? Family members and girlfriends. And so you start tying all those things together. Once you tie those together, it's the job of that bureau commander then to devote the resources to take care of that particular problem. Once you do that and you get that problem out of the neighborhood, how do you talk to the citizens about it? What we had decided to do is meet with those citizens right there in their neighborhoods, and we called them impact meetings. We'd shut down both sides of the street. We'd invite everybody out into the middle of the street. We would talk about the issues. We would talk about what had occurred. And what that did was open up a big line of communication, because then you had neighbors confronting other neighbors and saying, I'm done with the dope dealing that's going on at this house. You need to leave. And what happened? They left. Because now this neighborhood was empowered. They were no longer going to sit there and just watch crime take place in their neighborhood, because they knew that law enforcement was reacting to it. So you built that trust. So when we talk about intelligence-led policing, it is important that you remember the philosophies of community policing. You still have to communicate. You still have to have those citizens providing you the information that you need to do your job, and that the citizens need for you to do your job. That was one of the biggest tools that I think we learned out of intelligence-led policing when we instituted that. The chief covered how now it's transformed into the whole department. Every bureau practices intelligence-led policing. Every bureau has a crime analyst that feeds that information, because at the time that we originally do this, each CP officer or community policing officer was doing their own crime analysis on it. And so it took them away from the streets a little bit more than what we wanted. So it was important that we brought that aspect into the police department. One thing that I'll tell you that wanes as well is there's a lot of good people that have been involved in neighborhood associations, involved with their community. Well, they've been involved with it since 1994. It's 2014. Some of those folks have died. Some of those folks are tired of doing this. It is very hard to get people now to fill into their place. One thing that we know from law enforcement, if there's a huge tragedy, such as 9/11, everybody comes together. What can we do? When you don't have those things going on, citizens in America, plus the cops, can be very fickle. And you forget about what you learned, and you move on to something else, and then when something happens, you're like, well, how do we deal with this? Well, we dealt with this in 2010. This is how we dealt with it. Sometimes we forget the lessons that we learned from issues, and we always have to remember those. One thing that I'll tell you, since it's kind of a leadership panel as well, a good leader will always surround themselves with people that are smarter than they are. None of us up here, I'm assuming, know everything about everything. And it's very important as a leader that you surround yourself with folks that understand topics that you do not, and educate you. And it's important as a leader that you step back and allow them to be that way. Leaders that want to take full kudos for everything that goes on are not true leaders. Those are folks that are wanting to get somewhere in life, i.e. usually politicians, which I claim not to be one. I happen to be an elected official, but not a politician, Sheriff. Fast forward now, I get elected sheriff. I go over to the sheriff's office. I know that intelligence-led policing works, and it works very well. County is a little bit different. You don't have those concentrated areas of crime. It's spread out through the county. One thing that I found out also was technology. We were lacking tremendously on any technology to be able to even track crime trends and put that information out. We worked very hard on getting those type of systems put together. Luckily, the city of Wichita is good friends with Mike Kohlmeyer, who put that together for the city of Wichita, and he's now helped out the county to be able to do that. We're in the process now. We're able to put that information out. We've utilized some folks that we brought in that were college students that knew a lot about technology, were interested in intelligence-led policing, to put all that information together for us and to disseminate that to the deputies. In the last year, we've done 3 projects where it has culminated into arrests on particular suspects. It's very time and resource intensive, though, because what you're talking about having to do is catch them in the act. Because just because we have this information and you stop them for a traffic ticket doesn't mean that you're going to get anything other than a traffic ticket out of it. A little bit hard to understand sometimes for police officers and for citizens when it comes to burglaries and those type of things. I'm letting you know, we allow them to commit the burglary. Because if we don't, you think they're going to get any prison time? You think they're going to get a felony? They're not. The other thing in the state of Kansas that I really try to get out to citizens to understand as well, if I go out and commit 30 burglaries and get caught on one and get charged with 10 of them, I have no other prior record at all. How many people think that that person goes to prison? They don't. It's probation. They can go out and commit another 100 burglaries. We catch them, charge them with 2. How many people think they go to prison? They don't. It's probation. Not until their 3rd conviction do they actually go to prison. And what the chief had talked about with prolific burglars, These folks are ravaging areas, okay? When we first started intelligence-led policing, we identified about 10 burglars throughout the city of Wichita that was causing these type of issues. We were able to take 8 of them into custody. And I can't remember the percentages, but we had about a 12% reduction in burglaries during that time frame. They were just ravaging the city, and nothing is keeping them in jail. Now, as the jail manager, I can tell you right now, when burglars, forgers, those type of people come in, they don't stay in jail very long. My jail system is full of the folks that have committed murders, rapes, robberies, and then also the child sex crime stuff. That I got about half of my jail is full of those folks, okay? That is a crime that is really starting to take off. You know, kind of in closing, I'm putting this out there so that it gives you maybe some questions to ask, because I have some questions of you all. With what Major Lionel had talked about and Mr. Santiago, with the fact that we have to be careful how we do intelligence-led policing, that we're not infringing on anybody's civil rights. We changed the way that we do business inside the jail. We have a new phone system and internet visitation. Now, it's great for the families to be able to visit, but what it did for us is intelligence-led policing. Nobody said, thank goodness criminals are not rocket scientists, because we would never catch them. And so we post on the wall next to the phone and internet visitation, these things are recorded. They get 2 prompts before they start talking. Your conversation is being recorded. How many of them do you think still talk about the burglaries they committed, where the dope is at in the house to please get out of the house before the cops show up? Yeah, a lot of them. And so with that information, we have people now that continuously monitor those phone calls. There's other software involved with that to track folks that are trying to still run businesses illegitimate businesses outside of the jail that we're able to track. In the last month, we were able to give information to the Wichita Police Department on 2 burglary rings. They're able to take down both of those burglary rings based upon that information. You know, is that infringing on their rights? I don't think it is. The law says it isn't, but we have people that think it is. This is the bigger one, though. The other thing that is really coming about is social media. We are right now researching some companies that will provide us with tools to be able to go out, because social media goes to the cloud. So if you post anything that you really don't want other people to see, don't post it, because it's open information. And so what companies have done, they've come up with these programs to be able to monitor Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, you name it. And originally they were going to put that out to citizens. They figured out very quickly this wasn't something the citizens should have in their hands. They now started putting that out to law enforcement agencies. The Boston bomber, one of the reasons they identified who those people were, this particular group that was doing it called Boston and said, hey, we can get out there and look at anybody that posted pictures or anything during that time frame. They put a window over the top of that during that time frame, opened it up, and there's all types of witnesses that never came forward to the police that had pictures that they didn't even know of these 2 gentlemen actually setting the bomb down. All those pictures you've seen on TV, that's how they discovered them. So at this point, within our agency, we're looking at how do we utilize that type of information? And should we utilize that type of information? We had a company come in. Luckily for me, every company that's come in, there's been 5. We put a little window over the top of the jail to make sure somebody in the jail doesn't have a cell phone they shouldn't have, and they're posting stuff from inside the jail. I'm happy to say that at that time, we didn't have any cell phones in there, what the inmates had. So, but we also centered it around some other high schools, because you can put in certain terms like party or beer, those type of things, and you can identify where underage drinking is taking place, where they're having the party. One of the things that we found was a gal that was posting how she was going to commit suicide. We immediately called the Derby principal, let them know, along with the SRO down there. They were able to take that child out, talk to the parents, and sure enough, she was contemplating committing suicide that night. So it can be for good things as well. But there's several examples I can give you, but the question is, should we in law enforcement be doing that? And that's my question to you all when you start asking us questions. Because there is some very good uses to monitor social media, some very good uses. But is that big brothering too much? That's what we're weighing right now in Sedgwick County. Should we do it or not? So, thanks again for listening to me, and I appreciate you having me today.
Well, thanks to our panelists, and as promised, it's your time. It's a lot of wisdom collected up here, so if you have questions, we'll ask you to just go ahead. It's small enough. Susan's got a microphone. She'll come running if you'll identify yourself. And in order to prime the pump, I think one of the things, Sheriff, that you're talking about is interesting to me, because I think one of the flip sides to the civil rights issue is as that debate starts to settle out, I think we saw, especially with the move to the Baghdad invasion, you saw kind of a growing sense of almost a Praetorian mindset, that the people in uniformed service will just take care of that problem for us, and so we don't have to get engaged. I think when you think relative to the emerging fields of cybercrime, where a crime is dislocated from the community, it becomes very easy for the public to transfer that Praetorian mindset to uniformed local and state law agencies as well. You're supposed to just take care of that for us. The more you push on whether or not we should use these types of technologies, the more you exacerbate that mindset. And so I guess I will put to this panel, what do you think the role is for local and state law enforcement to help to mitigate or offset the growing tendency of the community to just simply make that a problem of the agency, make it go away?
One of the things that I think is very important, though, is to be open and transparent in law enforcement. For years, law enforcement hasn't been that way, and it's a time now where we have got to be open and transparent. I think when we talk about this social media issue, there's a catch-22 there. You want to catch the criminals, so do you want to educate them? I don't know. I don't think so. But on the flip side of that, you all in this room, do you want to be educated to the fact that what it is that we're capable of doing? Because you're going to argue that what you're doing should be illegal, although it's open. So any of your kids' stuff that is posting things on Twitter or Snapchat anybody can read. And so that is the crux of that particular problem. We're here to protect you. We're here to protect the public from these type of criminals that are out there operating within your neighborhoods. But when is it too much is the question. And I'm not sure I can answer that right now. I think we have an obligation, but we also know that we're in a day and age where a lot of folks think the government is being too intrusive. There's times that I believe the government's being too intrusive. And so to be able to answer that as yes or no, I don't have an answer for you. And that's why I put that out here. Because those are other conversations you need to have with the community to get a feel of what they feel. That are they going to tolerate something like that, or are they not going to tolerate it?
I think the bigger issue is if you look at the United States Constitution, that is what guides the decision-making and the actions of law enforcement. We have to operate within that Constitution. But when you look at when that Constitution was written versus where we are today with technology, that is the challenge that we face when Sheriff Easter talks about transparency. I believe in transparency to a degree because we cannot violate somebody's right in the name of transparency. And so when you look at our Constitution, is our Constitution in a manner that it deals with the overall evolution of technology, the evolution of privacy in the last probably 5 to 10 years with the technology and all of the other things that go along with it. That is a tremendous challenge for us in law enforcement that even the courts are struggling with, from that standpoint. Exactly what can we do when it comes to Facebook and those kind of things, even cell phones, downloading information from cell phones. And so that has really changed the dynamics in law enforcement, particularly in the last 5 years. I mean, we've faced some challenges.
Yeah, I would agree that first off, the Constitution is the foundational and bedrock document that drives who we are as American people. And I would also agree that one of the challenges that all law enforcement have, and the military as well, is that technology always seems to outpace the law. It takes a while for lawmakers and American people to decide that when we reap the benefits of technology, all the great things that we can do, that most technology is a dual-edged sword. It has wonderful opportunities, but it also increases our vulnerability. So I think there's a responsibility on the part of the American people. I think that some of our speakers have talked about this. When we get better at law enforcement and in the military and protecting, there's a certain complacency that grows in. The fact is you don't get as many community leaders anymore. You don't get as many people involved because things are pretty good right now. And the point of fact is that the liberties that we enjoy in this country, and those of us that have worn the uniform and gone to other places and seen that those countries don't enjoy those liberties. And what I would remind all of you out there and all of our listeners online is that those liberties were hard fought and protected by those in uniform, both in the military and those that protect the individual citizens, protect and serve those individual citizens in this country. I really have a strong belief, and this gets back to Dr. Shepard's comment about Praetorian Guard. I really have a strong belief in servant leadership. I always felt that I had a responsibility to every single Marine and sailor that I led, because frankly, there was the mothers and fathers in America that had entrusted those people to me. And I think it's an important thing for all of us who wear a uniform or have worn a uniform to realize that with extraordinary power comes extraordinary responsibility.
Thank you, General. I also think it's important for us to understand that we are the ones who are posting all the information on Facebook, on Snapchat, on Twitter, on all these other Instagram. I'm sure I'm missing at least 10 or 15 more. But it is your information that you are freely posting in an open forum. So that information is out there. I can Google your name and all kinds of information will just pop up on just a normal search engine. So that information is out there. So really, we need to really have a national debate on some of these issues, but you are knowingly putting this information out there. Your personal problems and issues and pictures and so forth. We are obviously in some cases we're capturing some of that information, but you are the ones who are willingly putting that information out there. So we need to have a national debate when it comes to some of these things. And so even though you're willingly putting that information out there, when that information perhaps is captured in a criminal investigation or what have you, then there's some sort of apprehension about that because it was law enforcement or perhaps some other government entity that captured that information. Meanwhile, you were the ones who put that information out there in the first place. So I think that we need to think about some of these issues. And like the general and the sheriff and the chief said, this is a fairly, we're at the early stages of this debate. I think it's going to be years and perhaps decades as technology evolves and the law finally catches up.
I spent a good part of my life with 18-year-olds, and I keep trying to convince them that Facebook is forever. But if you're 18, forever doesn't mean a whole lot. And with that being said, that means I am a classroom teacher. So I am now telling the audience, ask a question or I'll call on you. That's the way it works. There we are. An A+ student, thank you.
For the panel as a whole, recently there's been more and more discussion about the militaristic approach of local law enforcement, particularly in the smaller communities. What is your insight on the equipment that local law enforcement has the opportunity to share from the federal government and from the military, and how it approached to intelligence-led policing working with the community?
As everybody knows, the funding for law enforcement has never been fantastic in the first place. We basically get what we need to survive for that year. When the opportunity came from the military that you could get surplus supplies from them, we took a look at what's called an MRAP. We also had an incident down here at 4141 South Seneca with a SWAT call out that went for a couple of days. We had to call in SWAT teams and some of their equipment because we did not have the ample equipment here in the city of Wichita to handle that situation. We looked at that MRAP as a vehicle that can also be utilized by the SWAT team, because we have a combined SWAT team mainly of police officers, but I have 4 sheriff's deputies that are on there as well. We also have a entry team that does all of our high-risk entries. If you've lived in Wichita for very long or been around folks at all that know anything about narcotics, there's a little white van, Econoline van, that used to house all of our entry team. That's what you drove up to the house in, and everybody knew it. And so, did that protect them properly? Somebody opens up with an AK-47, I got several dead members of my entry team inside of a van. And so, the decision was made to get the MRAP from the military. It did not cost taxpayers any money, and we utilize it only for those high-risk entries, or if there's a SWAT call-out that needs an additional vehicle on site to protect those deputies. Law enforcement has the right to live as well, folks. We have the right to protect ourselves. I understand that that looks a little bit militaristic, but the fact of the matter is that we don't have the funds to go out and buy those type of vehicles on our own. The military was gracious enough to give those vehicles to us, and we utilized it. It's not something that we drive the streets on, ride and patrol on, or any of those type of things. But when we need that type of equipment to keep our deputies safe, we will utilize it.
I think when you look at the military, they're one of the greatest entities when it comes to research and development in relationship to safety. Unfortunately, when you look at the 2 different wars we had, Iraq and Afghanistan, because of their ability to work with private sector and to develop equipment that would enhance the safety and the well-being of the military, that was important. And some people say, well, we don't have that same level here in America, but we do have high-caliber weapons. We do have people that will barricade themselves in, that will have multiple weapons, that will terrorize the neighborhood. And so the more that we can do to maximize and utilize equipment that's been developed and utilized by the military, it helps us to provide that safety and well-being to our personnel. Because as leaders, that is one of our #1 responsibility, is to ensure the safety and well-being, that they're able to go home at the end of their shift. And so if having that equipment from the military is part of the operations, that's a win-win for us. And I think we just need to do a better job of educating the public instead of Instead of being on the back end when there's been an unfortunate situation that happens, we need to be on the front end saying the reason we have this equipment is to be able to respond to any kind of situation that occurs in this community. And like I said, with the military, they're the greatest research and development entity in the world when it comes to looking at safety, because they try to develop the best equipment to keep their personnel safe, because they go in harm's way on an international level.
Okay, thank you. I'm probably going to be the guy up here that takes a little bit of a contrarian view, but, you know, so what else is new? I'm going to start by just saying that, you know, Marines are in the business of managing risk. We tend to go places where there's a fairly reasonable expectation that somebody's going to get hurt. Generally, if we do everything right, it's the other guy that gets hurt. But we also try to make sure that that we follow what I was referred to as our rules of engagement. And I'll tell you a story that was told to me by a former commandant of the Marine Corps. During the Second Battle of Fallujah, it got pretty hot there, and the rounds were going back and forth, and you know, people were getting shot up all over the place. And he talked to a young corporal who had a squad automatic weapon and hadn't fired a single shot. And, you know, the first concern was, you know, did this guy freeze up or anything? And he said, you know, no, sir. He says, that wasn't the problem, General. I didn't have a good shot where I could be absolutely convinced that I was going to kill a bad guy and not do some damage. I think that as we look at this whole issue of policing, and I fully respect the fact that police go in harm's way as well, and that they certainly deserve to come home at night to their families. But I think also, and I've heard a lot up here of some really good stuff about community policing, and we really have to be concerned about the image we present to the American people. They are not the enemy. And we use MRAPs, frankly, to go out there and be survivable enough so we can close with and destroy the enemy. And so it's going to take a dialogue. It's going to take some communication with folks that frankly are on the cusp as to whether police and the military are their friends or their foes. And so I think this is a situation, and I'm not being critical of any decision whether or not to accept surplus military equipment. You know, I'm fairly familiar with law enforcement budgets and the challenges that they face. But I do think we have to ask ourselves, what image do we present to the American people? I'll just tell one other story. When we were moving through the various towns on our way to Baghdad, we were very careful not to shoot unless we were pretty certain that we were confident that we were engaging with the enemy. And frankly, if we didn't know where the shots were coming from and we didn't have a good shot, we just kept going, because the most important thing was to get to Baghdad. There was another unit that was told that you don't get a combat action ribbon unless you shoot a weapon. And I could tell every single village that they went into after we went there. Because before, people were looking at us as liberators. They were holding up their kids, they were waving at us, you could see everybody. Afterwards, all you would see is old men, and they'd be shaking their fist at us or showing us one finger. And so we have to be extraordinarily careful. I'm not being critical of law enforcement. What I am saying is we need to think about the image that we present to the American people, because they are not the enemy. There are individuals within the population who I guess we could describe as the enemy, but ultimately I think we need to be asking ourselves that question.
Thank you, General. Let me propose a scenario to you. We have a barricaded gunman scenario, perhaps some hostages. Police response is delayed because the police department is not properly prepared to go into a situation like that. We're not properly equipped, whether it might be a vehicle, proper vests, uniforms, and so forth. We respond. It takes us a little bit longer. We respond. Officers get hurt. Perhaps we lose some of the hostages and so forth. Let me fast forward after that incident. The media in the community and some within the police department will then start asking questions. How come the police department was not prepared to handle certain situations? And I would argue with you that things have changed. We have seen the Columbines of the world, the Newtowns, the Navy schoolyard shooting. There's a lot of things that are going on out there that, quite frankly, we didn't face, 25, 20 years ago. We need to be prepared. Perhaps there's a debate can happen on perhaps on the employment of some of those resources, how we employ them and so forth. But as a police department, sheriff, police chief, and so forth, like Police Chief Williams said, our ultimate responsibility is for the safety of our police officers. And we have to do a job. When the phone rings, we have to answer. And we cannot come up with excuses as to how come we're not unprepared.
Sonoa Payne, Anti-Terrorism Advisor and Critical Infrastructure Program Manager at McConnell Air Force Base. I had a question. You somewhat touched on social engineering and planning. Mr. Santiago talked about planning there at the end. In light of the current ongoings that are in the media right now about the lone wolf and the insider threat, how much local planning or effort is being put into addressing those type of incidents, an active shooter incident or a lone wolf incident in a mass gathering place here in the local community?
I can tell you within the Wichita Police Department, we're constantly looking at our emergency operation plans, not only from a department-wide, but also from a bureau-wide perspective on how they respond to an active shooter. We've trained in how we will respond to an active shooter, whether it's in the school or any other kind of business, because if you don't share information and everybody's not on the same accord, then it's going to delay that reaction. And so we all have plans based on how things have changed, particularly in the last 10 to 14 years in this community. But the other part of it is that those plans have to be constantly updated, revised, and discussed with the supervisors and personnel in order to be effective. And even working with the schools. I mean, we work with the USD 259 as far as how we would respond to an active shooter in the school and coordinating those kind of activities.
Just kind of reiterating what the chief said, we also train together between the sheriff's office and the police department in active shooter training. The reason for that is because you never know who you're going to be showing up with to address those situations. The first 4 deputies or officers that might show up is a combination of both of us, and we both need to understand what the other training is about. We also put on training for the outlying entities, the other police departments within Sedgwick County. There's 21 other police departments that could potentially respond with us to a high school out in the county. We also look at our policies every year on how we're going to address those type of situations. In fact, if I can expand on that a little bit, the bigger one right now is Ebola. We sat down last week, started looking at how we would react to an inmate that had contracted Ebola and what that would cause for us. And so we are sitting down, looking at everything that we would have to do, how we would transport that individual, and how we would quarantine other individuals. In a jail that houses 1,300 people, that is a big issue for us right now. And so we've kind of formalized our plans Monday on how exactly we would address that. So any of those type of issues that are active shooters, diseases, if we have an anthrax attack, we sit down and we really take a look at those. We also have entities here in Sedgwick County that's what their job is to look if we have a terrorism attack, how are they going to coordinate with everybody that needs to be involved, because that's not just law enforcement or public safety, that also involves Department of Public Works and other entities within the county and the city to work together. And so those exercises take place twice a year, where they do real live exercises to make sure that we're still understanding that these are real threats and not forgetting that what we have learned over time.
I'd like to just follow up with the comments of the sheriff and the chief. We're also constantly training and reevaluating all of our plans on a constant basis. If an agency or an organization is not training, then they are stagnant, and that's a bad thing. I can tell you that we have partnerships with the school board and area businesses. We have done incident responses and training at local tourist attractions in order to prepare for perhaps some eventuality. We train constantly, and I can tell you that I'm from Central Florida, so you can imagine some of the, 50 million people go through Orlando International Airport every year. So you can imagine the possibilities. So we are constantly addressing those and training for any eventuality.
When you look at the events of Newtown, Aurora, Colorado, even Boston, there are several keys that came out of those unfortunate tragedies. Training is one of those. Joint training with area and local public safety entities, because that joint training is able to reduce delayed time as far as reacting to that event. And the more you can do joint training, it's a win-win for the community. And the other part of that is understanding that joint training helps to eliminate barriers and understand the different expectations when you're responding to that training. That's why we have a joint law enforcement training center between the Wichita Police and Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office. And like I said, those things have been critical, particularly in recent mass tragedies, is that joint training and the ability to respond in a timely, professional manner with the resources to stabilize that tragedy.
Anyone else? Sir.
Investigator Justin Patterson from Connell Air Force Base. With disclosure in mind, what barriers in your experience exist on the JTTF with sharing and gathering information for dissemination?
Well, he's talking about the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, and because that task force deals with a lot of top secret information, myself and the sheriff, when I was a chief, we had top secret clearances, so we had access to a lot of information that most people wouldn't have access to. That is critical, that is sensitive, and things of that nature there. You look at the incident that happened last December with the gentleman that was contemplating setting off a device at Mid-Continent. I mean, we were aware of what was going on because of our clearances, and we were able to direct resources accordingly without compromising the investigation. But there is some limitations because of constitutional expectations on what kind of information can be disclosed under that if you're not part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Did I answer your question?
Well, that's again some lessons learned. Prior to 9/11, those didn't exist. Local law enforcement, we weren't privy to any information that the federal government was working on. That was something that was devised after 9/11 because Homeland Security Department was brought on after 9/11 because the fact of the matter is we went to a lot of training after that fact and realized that it is going to happen in a community, and that community could be giving information to prevent that type of attack, and it took a collaborative effort with everybody involved, the federal agents, city law enforcement, county law enforcement, and citizens. Since that point, the information flow has been very good. Because it is top secret, and there's military people in here, so you know what that means. I'm not going to jail for telling somebody something that the FBI told me, trust me. So you cannot even give that information to your command staff. They just have to trust the fact that the reason you're making a decision on something isn't because you're crazy, it's because you've found out something that's going on and you can't relay it to them.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think that at the national level, if you think that you're going to solve these problems, particularly domestic issues, without involving local law enforcement, you're probably living in a different dimension. you know, we really do need to make sure that we have trusted agents, so to speak, people that have the appropriate clearances at all levels, so that the information that is needed flows up, down, and cross horizontally to other agencies. And there was a comment made earlier by one of the other speakers about getting credit, you know, and that's one of these issues that always causes difficulties, because obviously you like to be able to say, you know, we solved this, we did the right thing, because, you know, it's quite often budgets are tied to those types of decisions, and people like to, you know, be able to see that they did a good job. I always treat credit as not as a fungible thing. You know, if I give this nice lady in the turtleneck here $1, I don't have $1 anymore. If I tell her that she's a wonderful instructor or whatever it is that she does, you know, then I haven't lost anything. So the bottom line is that it's important that when we have these successes, and we've had a number of really significant successes, that we recognize the hard work of the local and state law enforcement agencies as well, because this is a team effort.
Just to piggyback on the sheriff's comments, I mean, he's absolutely right. You know, after prior to 9/11, we didn't really have that type of relationship, and after 9/11, and as we progress in this debate, we gradually saw an increase of information, you know, coming from the top to the bottom, and vice versa, like the general stated. Could it be better? I'm sure that it could, but, you know, a lot of information is sensitive, like the sheriff and the chief said. But at least we're talking, and that's a good thing. And there's certain progress needs to be made, but at least we're communicating, and that's a great thing. And I can tell you that from our standpoint at the Orlando Police Department, we have certain folks that are assigned to special units, and we also have some agents that are assigned to some of our tactical squads that are go out there and be proactive against crime, like the ATF, and we have officers assigned to other federal agencies as well. So there's a lot of collaboration going on, and that's a great place to be at.
The other thing is, a lot of states have what they call fusion centers, like Kansas has the Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center, and they're able to desensitize information that can be shared with the local agencies as much as they can, because they too realize that they have to be able to disseminate information in order to get information. Remember, I talked about sharing information as a two-way street, giving as well as receiving. And so the fusion centers have really broadened their ability to work closely with local agencies to give them information without compromising the civil rights of others from that standpoint. It's a balancing act, because civil liberties come into play big time.
I think it, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Louis Ferrer, McConnell Air Force Base Training Manager. Media is a powerful resource that we have available to us, and they have the ability to really help our emergency responders in unique situations. Unfortunately, what I've seen lately with recent news, they've also put a lot of information out there that I don't think is in the best interest of the public, because it seems to be more about ratings than anything else. Do you foresee any possibility in any training for them in the future, or any laws or things that could hold them a little more accountable for putting information that may not necessarily be factual or just too preliminary?
When I used to be chief, I would meet maybe once a year, if not every 6 months, with the assigning editors with the local media, whether it was TV, radio, print, to talk about policies, to talk about relationships, because the media is a key partner when it comes to the community safety, because like you said, they can disseminate information and so quickly. The challenge there is making sure information is accurate and that information doesn't compromise an investigation. And so you're dealing with the First Amendment, that they're going to tell you that by First Amendment, I should be able to do this, this, and this. And so you try to develop those working relationships throughout your time as a chief, as a sheriff, or any kind of a leader, so that they understand that misinformation can be detrimental to the well-being of a situation and compromise an investigation. And during my time as chief, I thought that was successful from my standpoint, was meeting with those individuals that are decision makers there with the media affiliates.
You know, the media can be treated as a partner, there's no doubt about that, but you can't control the media. And so you can partner with them all day long. It's about ratings for the media, and they'll tell you that. And they will report what the facts are that they have found out about. The thing that I or that upsets me is when they're delving into a case, and take the Carr brother case, was a big case around here, and they're delving into that and putting out information, constantly asking law enforcement questions on how the investigation started, different tools that were used in the investigation, did they confess, those type of things, which we have to stay above that fray, because our interest is to put together the best case possible to convict the person of this crime, to bring justice to that family. Sometimes the public, every once in a while, will get a little bit upset about that. But the problem is that if you go and start talking about those issues, you're tainting the jury pool. And how can that person actually get a fair trial if you're putting out all that information? There has been times that I've seen on national TV where there will be a chief or a sheriff talk about an investigative tool that they used, an investigative tool that we use constantly here. And you're like, why did they do that? Because I'm going to get a phone call tomorrow from the media going, so do you use this, this, and this? Well, you're not going to lie to them. But now you're giving up some of the tricks of the trade to try to get your job done, because somebody decided that it would be a good idea to put that information out. And when you put information out like that, it just doesn't affect your agency. This day and age, when you look at Rodney King or you look at the Ferguson thing, when those things happen, it affects every law enforcement agency in the United States, and we have to learn how to deal with that.
The media is the media. With that being said, I think that there are tools available that we could use to maximize and get the message out that we want to get out. And so why can't departments have a Facebook page or a Twitter page or an Instagram page? And we control the message, a YouTube page. And it's about communication, isn't it? So there are ways for us to communicate via alternative means, whether that be a great success, whether we have 50 officers helping in building a playground for a school, or whether that means updating the community on a pressing issue. There are other avenues for us to get our message out, and I think that we should pursue those.
The other part of that is you find that local media, if you have a Facebook or any other type of venue as far as social media, they will go to your page. We've seen that happen within the police department. We put things out on our page that the mainstream media may not get, but they go to that to look at it and use that in their reporting. So as Officer Santiago talked about, sometimes you can control the message best as you can that you have control over, but the media is going to do what the media wants to do, because as Sheriff used to say, they want ratings.
I'll just make one point here in terms of, the speakers are exactly right. Not only can we not control the media, I don't think I would really want to control the media, or at least have that responsibility. But one of the things that you can control as a leader is reinforcing positive behavior and developing a relationship with those media individuals, because the media is not a monolith. I mean, there's a lot of different levels of professionalism and ability. And so I would always try to reinforce positive behavior, working with those media people, not necessarily that gave me the most favorable stories, about us, but essentially strove for accuracy and worked in a professional manner. So I recall one time that I was sitting in an editorial board because we had a particular paper in Southern California that it just continually engaged in hyperbole and sensationalism and not a particular great deal of fact-based reporting. And so a new editorial board came in and they wanted to know how they could fix things. And I said, the first thing is hire a really competent reporter. And secondly, understand that even if you don't hire a competent reporter, we will always return their call, but we'll return your call last. Because you've got to call everybody, you've got to respond, you've got to communicate. So I'm not trying to control the message, but you do control some access, and you have that power. And what you try to do is get your message out through individuals, not necessarily that are in your hip pocket, but essentially individuals that will inform the media, inform the public in the most responsible manner possible.
One of our captains that is here, Captain Dan East, used to be our public information officer, so he knows what we're talking about as far as the media, because he's had to work with the media with the Wichita Police Department.
One of the things that I think you've seen from law enforcement is exactly what the chief said about a PIO. We instituted a PIO at the sheriff's office as well, and it's, by no way, shape, or form are you trying to control the media, and I agree with the general, you don't want to anyway. They're there to report the news, okay? The fact is, what you want as a law enforcement officer or commander is for those facts to be factual, period. And so there's times when those facts have been stated to them factually, they're not reported that way, and that's when you have to make contact with that particular news station and let them know that you're not happy about that, because those weren't the facts. A good, reputable news station will then reprint the story or retell the story with those facts. If you have somebody, I don't know in Orlando, if you have a particular news station that you have issues with and they refuse to do that, you might not want to talk to them as much anymore.
We do.
And we found that here in Wichita at one point. And so they drive just as much, they want the mayhem, they want the killings, that's what drives their news. And if you have a station that is not reporting responsibly and reporting the facts as they are, such as the general said, they're the last to call back or don't call them back. They will conform sooner or later to the fact that, okay, we got to quit sensationalizing things, quit misprinting things, we got to report the facts or nobody's going to want to talk to us.
I wonder if you would address, as far as terrorism, long-term infiltration, terrorists that plant someone and then years later has an impact.
I guess I'll start because you were looking at me. I think this is a matter of significant concern. Essentially what you're talking about is sleeper cells, folks that come in and become part of the community for years. And I think it's a very legitimate concern. I think this is also a reason why we get back to local community policing and why it's so important, because this isn't something that is probably, it might get picked up through national intelligence, maybe there's some communication, but in some cases these people don't communicate for years. And if that happens, then the only way you're going to find out is through citizens noticing that something just isn't right and telling their local law enforcement professionals that there's something going on here that just doesn't seem right. But it is a concern, and it's something that I don't try to get people too alarmed, but I can't dismiss it either.
I guess the only thing I'd add to that is that we always have to be diligent when we're looking into those type of issues and citizens that call in suspicious activity, whether it's through terrorism or anything else. I will tell you that it's hard sometimes to explain to citizens, working in a certain part of town, certain youth were gathered at a corner because of the way they're dressed. They're all gang members. They're up to something bad. Made several calls. They're not gang members. They're not up to anything bad. The fact of the matter is today's dress is what it is, and these kids are just fitting in. And so as a law enforcement officer, you have to have an open mind about that. Just because of someone's perception of something doesn't make it factual.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we're faced here in the United States is this whole notion of the changing faces of potential violent extremists. I mean, it's changing each and every day. If you listen to the FBI director a few weeks ago, he talked about one of the concerns he has is those individuals that are born and raised in America that have a different extremist view where they go abroad, learn techniques, and then come back to the United States. One of my biggest fears when I was chief was somebody strapping a bomb to their bodies and going out to townies. That was my biggest fear because of the potential mayhem that could be created because someone had such a strong dislike for anything and they wanted to send a message in what was, and particularly during the Christmas holiday. I mean, for 14 years, that was my biggest nightmare that I faced because it's ever changing.
Yeah, one of the things that we saw predominantly in the Marine Corps and the Army was gangs sending in gang members into the military with clean records. In other words, they hadn't been picked up yet for anything really significant so that they were able to enlist. And they would tend to go into the combat arms, and we worked very closely with law enforcement to be able to recognize those things, this is actually kind of a adjunct to your question about sleepers, but essentially it was sleepers that were going to do get some military training and then come back into the local community. So this is not a terrorism issue, it's a gang issue. And, we worked very closely with law enforcement to help identify those individuals, and there were particular gangs that tended to have that as an MO.
You bring up a good point, General, too, that, also as law enforcement agencies, we also need to be cognizant of perhaps being infiltrated ourselves. And so our recruitment process and the process that we have in place has to be rigorous in nature to perhaps catch some of those issues that we're looking at. Let me give you an example. Tattoos are a big deal in law enforcement, and I think that somebody in the recruiting department needs to be well-versed in interpreting some of the tattoos that some of these people are having, and where they're visible, where they're located, and so forth. There's a whole, almost like a science to that. But there's all kinds of different ways. So we, as a discipline, there's many issues. However, we also need to be aware that there may be some characters out there that may be trying to infiltrate.
Amy? Kind of pulls together media and terrorism and the nomenclature that the general brought up. Listening to some media reports myself, I'm thinking, for example, the incident in Oklahoma City with the beheading in the company, and thinking, okay, they were saying it's workplace violence. To me, other things, it looks like an act of terrorism. From your perspectives, can you give us some insight why some of these things don't seem to make sense?
From my perspective, that whether it's workplace violence or whether it's labeled as terrorism, there's a victim's family there that's suffering. It's all how we handle that situation. We're going to handle it like any other homicide. I think that becomes a lot more political, especially right now because of what's going on as far as elections coming up. The arguments between, well, that's terrorism and that's workplace violence. For us as a law enforcement agency, it's a homicide. And you're there to do what you can for that family that's suffering from that loss of that loved one, and to seek justice for the person that was killed.
We have as Sheriff Easter talked about, we have a responsibility to investigate the case. It's not our responsibility to label terrorism or otherwise. Our job is to investigate, to hold the suspect accountable for their actions, and the media and other people have a tendency to want to put labels on because there may be a similarity with an act that happened somewhere else, that occurred someplace else. We're focusing on that investigation. We're looking at what happened, who did it, bringing justice to the family, to the victim, without labeling anything, making sure we do the very best we can to do a thorough and complete investigation on behalf of the victim as well as their family. And as far as labeling, we don't worry about labeling something a terrorist act. It's an act of violence.
I agree completely with what the two previous speakers have said. I think that there's a rush to labels. The most important thing, first off, is to resolve the crime and to find out who did it, bring them to justice. And then at that point, I think it's entirely appropriate to try to look at the underlying causes and try to decide what caused this person to commit this act. Was it a relationship issue based upon workplace violence? Was there some type of a radicalization that occurred, and why did that radicalization occur? But we're really quick to put a label on something, and I think the two gentlemen that spoke before me have got it entirely correct. Let's solve the issue, get the facts, adjudicate the issue, and then really sit down and think about how did this happen, and can we prevent it in the future?
I think it's important to understand, just to piggyback on the comments, is that law enforcement and justice is a deliberate process. And the media wants to solve the case, examine the societal impact of the case, prosecute the case, and then give you perhaps a guilty or innocent verdict, all within a 2 or 3 hour news cycle. And we don't operate like that. We operate on facts, on logic. That is how we conduct ourselves, and that's the right thing to do.
Okay, at this point, as I'm reflecting on everything that I've heard, and thank you again to all of our panelists, and thank you to you for your questions, I'm reminded in the late 90s, a book called Habits of the Heart, and the takeaway of that book was basically that our fates are all tied together. I think, reflecting on everything that's been said, 9/11 has been mentioned probably more than any other term of art, and what that has done, that event has lifted up in a very acute way, in my estimation, exactly the point that was pronounced through that book. Our fates are indeed tied together. I have also gleaned from this conversation that we need to have a national dialogue on how we value the fact that our fates are tied together, when the other term that was most frequently used was resources and resourcing. That is an expression of what we value. So, my charge to you in the audience is to reflect on what you've learned and to go raise in your quarters, in your offices, in your workplace, in your churches, in your communities, with your neighbors, a discussion on how do we value these things. That, to me, would be a good outcome of this conversation, and I think a tremendous help to all of you who are in the room that have an occupational specialty that is concerned with the fact that our fates are indeed tied together. You're the front line of our social contract and the preservers of our civil society. That's very serious business. I don't take it lightly. And despite perhaps Praetorian pretensions in the civil society, they don't either, but they must be challenged with the questions. So, Sheriff Easter did have questions. He said he wanted to hear from you. I will let these gentlemen get off this stage and wander. You're welcome to linger, to visit, to shake a hand. I would like to thank you again for your time and your participation. There will be an evening lecture where Major General Lenhert will discuss terrorism this evening in this very same location. and I do hope to see you there. I hope that you will invite friends, and I hope we will have a more targeted discussion. So thank you again for participating.
Please.